Hello Octoprint fans, former lurker here. Today I'm going to walk you through the Getting Started guide, and to find that I've dropped a link down below. So if you look for the Getting Started guide, if you want to find it manually, you can basically just search for Octolapse and GitHub, and it should be the first link. And then once you get into the repository page that you can see here, you just click on the wiki link right here, and the Getting Started guide's over here on the right. And this guide is for version 0.4. So if you're running, or if you're planning on running a new version, or if this is an old video, you may see a different version up here. Okay, so let's click the Getting Started link. And I'm going to assume that this is a brand new installation. I may create another video and show you how to do an upgrade from a previous version. And as of now, the most recent release, stable release anyway, is version 0.3.4. So this is a fresh install. So let's click on see the installation instructions link right here. And there are a couple prerequisites that you have to make sure that you have installed in order to get Octolapse working. The most important one being, if you're running Python 3, you may need to install the Python 3 development package. As of right now, Octopi is released with Python 3, but not the development package. And because Octolapse has to compile a Python extension, it requires the development package. So in order to do that, you have to connect to your Pi. I'm going to use PuTTY and connect via SSH. You can use a keyboard and mouse or any way that you want to connect. And I've actually got a guide that shows you how to connect to your Raspberry Pi with PuTTY. So you might be able to find that too if you're having trouble. So I'm just going to click my profile. I've already got one made here. And then it's going to open a window and it's going to ask me to log in. So I'm going to enter my user, and that's the default Pi user. And now I have to enter in my password. So I'm copying it out right now from my password manager. And if you just click in the terminal window in PuTTY, you can paste just with a single right click. So I'm going to right click in there and I'm going to copy in my password. And now I'm all logged in. So now if you go back to the wiki, you'll see this command here for installing the Python 3 dev package. So I'm going to copy that out, go back to the terminal, I'm going to right click to paste it in, and I'm going to hit enter. Now it's asking me for my password, so I'm going to copy that out again and right click again to paste it. Okay, now on your machine it's probably going to take a little while to install this, but I actually just installed this a couple minutes ago. So it's already detected that Python 3 dev is the newest version. So you may have to wait a little bit, and as soon as it's done installing, it's a good idea to reboot your Pi, and you can do that with the sudo space reboot command. And when you hit enter, it'll reboot your Pi. Wait for it to boot up, and then we can continue following the instructions. So let's go back to the wiki and see what we have here. So I recommend you follow this new installation from the plugin manager guide, and I'll show you how to do this, but I created this video before I actually released this version, so I can't install it this way just because it doesn't exist yet, but I'll show you how it would be done. So let's go to Octoprint, to our web page. Let's click on this little wrench spanner icon at the upper right hand corner. That opens the Octoprint settings. Now let's look for the plugin manager. You'll find it here in the right menu. And then click Get More, and then right here type in Octolapse. Now for you should see a link here to install version 0.4 or whatever the most recent version is. Click on that. It'll take a while to install. Octolapse has to compile a bunch of C++, so it takes a little bit of time, a lot longer than most plugins. Once that finishes, you'll be prompted to reboot. Go ahead and do that. I'm actually going to be installing directly from a link from one of the branches, because that's where the newest version is. This is the version that's going to eventually become 0.4. So I'm going to paste that in and hit install. And this should install pretty much in the same way as if you search for Octolapse, just like I showed you a minute ago. Now it takes a minute to install, so I'm going to go ahead and pause it, and then we'll wait for it to finish. Okay, so Octolapse just finished installing. I want to say it took about 4 minutes or so a little bit longer than most plugins. And now Octoprint wants you to reboot. You're going to have to do that. So I'm going to click Reboot Now and Proceed. Close all these windows out. All right, let's wait for it to reboot. Okay, so Octoprint's just rebooted, and you'll see Octolapse at the top. You may have a little drop-down menu to pick it. Once you click it, you should see the default Octolapse page with all the default settings. And you'll notice right away there's a little error here. So let's go back to the guide and see what's going on. So the after installation steps, there's an optional step here for restoring your default settings. Since this is a new install, you don't have to worry about that. There's some benefits to restoring the default settings because I changed a lot of things. So if you are upgrading, consider doing that. You may have to recreate your printer profile, but I'm going to walk through that. And there's a guide for creating a new one. So let's move on to update your printer profile. So it says here, once you have Octolapse installed, that you need to first add a new printer profile. And so let's go back to Octoprint, and you'll see this little plus button next to your printer if no printer is selected. And if you click that, it'll open up a window to create a new profile. Now in this version of Octolapse, you can actually import your printer profile from a profiles repository that I created for version 0.4. So if your printer is listed, you can basically import it and have a pre-configured profile. So I'm using a Prusa MK2.5S with MMU2. So I'm going to pick that. You'll see it's asking if we want to update from the server. And the reason it asks that is because it overwrites all your settings. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK because that's exactly what I want to do. You can see it downloads successfully from the server, and most of the options disappear because everything's pre-configured. Now you can customize your profile. So if you click this enable box, this customize profile box, you'll see all the settings that you can set. If you customize your profile, you won't get automatic updates. So this version of Octolapse, if I make changes to the profile, you'll be notified and you'll have the ability to update as long as you've imported the profile from the repository, just like I showed you here, and as long as your profile has not been customized, because I don't want to overwrite your custom settings. But I'm going to switch it back to custom because I know this one works pretty well for my printer. Now you'll see that by default, the slicer type that's selected is set to automatic configuration. And that means that Octolapse will try to pull your settings right from your G-code file. So all your slicer settings that you had to enter in the previous versions, in this version of Octolapse, that's automated for anyone using Cura, Simplify 3D, or any of the slicer variants, Slicer 3 PE or Prusa Slicer. And if you're using Cura, there's a couple extra steps. So you can click this link and you can find all the steps necessary for setting up automatic slicer configuration for Cura, and that's right here. So actually I can show you that real quick. So let's switch over to Cura, and now basically what you want to do here is find your machine settings. See if I can figure out how to do that. I'm going to go to manage printers. I'm going to find my printer here, go to machine settings, and then in your start code there's a little script that you have to enter. I wonder if I can make that bigger. Yeah, there we go. So you can find this script by going to the wiki, and oh, I'm in the wrong page. Let's go to Octoprint, and there's a little section here that kind of explains what setting script that you need to paste into your start G code. If you're using a multi-material or multi-extruder printer, you want to click in here, and there's a list of various scripts that you can use depending on your Cura version and how many extruders or materials you have. If you're using a single extruder printer, just make sure if you're using Cura 4.2 or above that you pick this one. And if you're using 4.1 and any version below that, click on this link. It looks like that is a broken link, but I'll fix that before I deploy. So let's look here. Oh, none of them are found. Well, that's unfortunate. Let's try these. Ah, there we go. So I will fix those before I deploy, but just copy this script out. And you want to switch back to Cura, and paste that script in here. I would do it right at the top, and you can see I've already pasted my script in. Once you paste it in, anything you slice with Cura from that point on will have the settings that Octolapse needs embedded right in the G-code file. Let's go back and look at the wiki again for a second. If you are using Slicer, Prusa Slicer or Slicer PE, there's one step that you may want to follow that will actually improve your print quality. So if you see this guide for these slicers, and if you open up Prusa Slicer, and then if you go into print settings and output options and enable verbose G-code by checking this box, that'll make your G-code file a bit bigger because it adds comments to the end of each line, but it tags each G-code with the feature that's currently printing. So whether it's printing infill or perimeters, it'll add that to the G-code, and that lets Octolapse make some better decisions about where to take snapshots. Octolapse prefers to take snapshots over infill or wipe towers so that it doesn't affect print quality as much. So if you enable that, you'll have better settings. This already works out of the box for Cura and Simplify 3D, so this is just for Prusa Slicer. All right. Okay, so now we have automatic settings enabled, and we're going to use that. And the next thing to do is to make sure our webcam is working, so we want to test that. So I'm going to switch over back to Octoprint. I'm going to save my new profile here that I created. And you see it selected in the box, and there's no errors. So let's look at our webcam profile. Now, if you're using Octopi and Octoprint is configured correctly to use the webcam and for the time-lapse functionality, Octolapse will suck your settings in, and it should set everything up. Now, if you have more than one camera, like I do, things might be just a little bit different. For me, my Raspberry Pi camera is on port 8080, and I have a Logitech webcam that's on port 8081. And that's actually the one that I want to set up because my stand is broken from my other camera, so it doesn't look right. So once you have adjusted these URLs, and again, you might not have to, just go ahead and click this Test Webcam button. If it comes back with a green success box, you're all good to go, at least for taking pictures. Okay, let's save this profile. Let's go back to the wiki. All right. So there's an optional step here, enabling custom image preferences. I've actually created a guide for this for both USB webcams and for the Raspberry Pi camera. I'm going to drop a link below, and by the time you read this, I may actually have a link to the video right here. So let's just skip this for now, and let's move on to your first time lapse. So everything should be working now. Your camera's set up, your printer profile's set up, and it's time to actually run a print. So I recommend that you start out with the default settings. So if you've changed your profiles, you may want to change them back just so we can have a clean slate and start with something that's not custom. So I have stabilization right now set to centered. The default trigger profile is the smart compatibility trigger, and the default rendering profile is MP4 at 60 frames a second. There's only one camera by default, and it's enabled, so make sure that box is checked. And the logging profile is set to log all errors. So if some exception happens, that'll show up in the log. Now the next thing you want to do is turn on test mode. Test mode's a pretty cool feature. It's been around for a while in Octolapse, and basically what it does, it prevents your bed from warming up, it prevents your extruder from warming up, prevents your fans from turning on, and it strips all extrusion commands, so no plastic should be extruded. I definitely recommend that you unload your filament first, just in case there's some undiscovered error in test mode, even though I think it's pretty stable, better safe than sorry. So go ahead and unload your filament. And when you enable test mode, you'll see a little message appear at the top that says that test mode is going to be activated as soon as you start a print. So let's go back over to Octoprint. Let's check this out. So I've got the center profile, the smart compatibility trigger. I'm using the MP4 60 frames a second rendering profile. My camera that we just tested is enabled. If I disable it, you'll see this camera disabled message, and it'll give you an error because you have to have at least one camera enabled for Octolapse to work. I'm going to go ahead and enable that. Log all errors is selected here in case something bad happens. And then test mode right now is disabled, so I want to click here to enable that. And you'll see this little message pop up at the top. That's exactly what I showed you earlier. And now we want to find a suitable test print. So I have a little test queue that I'm going to use. It's pretty small. It's fast. So it's a really nice thing to use to test Octolapse, something small and quick to print. So let's go ahead and I have to connect to my printer first. Great. So now we're connected. And also Octolapse only prints, it only works when printing from the Raspberry Pi. It won't work if you're printing from your printer's SD card. And there's various technical reasons why that's true, but in order to ensure that you're going to pick a file from your SD card, I recommend clicking on this little spanner wrench icon here and then selecting the only show files stored locally box, and that will take away any files that might be on your SD. There would be some here normally, but that'll hide them, so that way you won't run into any problems. So I'm going to pick this test cube now, and I'm going to start by clicking print. Now you may have noticed real quick that a progress bar showed up there, but it didn't take very long to process, so it was a little hard to see. But if you start with a really large G-code file, it may take a couple minutes or a minute to process, but this file was only like 300 some K, so it was pretty quick. So after that progress bar goes away, that means that Octolapse is done looking at your G-code file. It's extracted all the settings from your slicer. It's calculated where it's going to take snapshots, and it turns out it's going to take 251 snapshots for this particular print. And if you see any messages up here, these are warnings that might tell you that there's a problem or maybe some quality issue when you're printing with Octolapse. In this case, Octolapse could not find any print features, and that's because I sliced this file with Prusa Slicer, but I did not enable verbose G-code that I showed before. But if you click the little help links here, if you get any of these warnings, there's some instructions for fixing it. There's some links. So definitely anytime you run into a problem or you have a question, look for these little blue question marks. They always open up some help, and I'm improving that all the time. So hopefully that'll help you out a little bit and save you, some Google foo. Now this section here, this tells you where your extruder is when a snapshot is going to start, where it's actually going to take a picture, and then where it's going to be when it returns. And in this section, you see some just statistics about the print. This is how much travel is added total by Octolapse. And if you're using one of the smart triggers, this little statistic here tells you how much travel time was saved by using the new smart triggers versus using the classic triggers, or basically any of the triggers that existed in Octolapse version 0.3.4. This section is kind of an illustration of each snapshot. That's a little hard to see here because this part is really tiny, but the red circle indicates where your extruder started when it's about to take a snapshot. Little green dot says where it's going to return to, and little blue circle says where the extruder will be when it actually takes a snapshot. So I can click on these arrows to move from snapshot plan to snapshot plan. So this would be the fourth snapshot it's going to take. And if you hit this play button, it'll animate through everything. You can kind of see how it moves around. If you have a bigger print, this is going to be more interesting to look at. But again, this is just a small little test print. Now, if you don't like what you see or you want to fix some of these problems, and I definitely recommend that you solve any of the problems that you're warned about up here, you can cancel the print and it basically will stop. So my printer didn't start at all. I can change settings and then I can click print again and it'll go through the process. Once you're happy with what you see, you can click accept and continue, and your printer should start printing immediately. So it's going to take it just a second for the axes to home and for it to go through bed leveling and whatnot. So I'm going to pause it, and then as soon as it starts doing something interesting, I'll start it again. All right, so it's finishing priming right now. So I'm going to switch back to the Octolapse tab, and you can see up here it says no snapshots have been taken, but pretty soon you're going to see an icon pop up, a little animated icon, and that is going to tell you that Octolapse is waiting for the printer to finish all of its print moves that are in the buffer before it takes a picture. And if you scroll down a little bit, you can see in this snapshot plan just how close it is. So we're 99%. So there we see the icon, and now it's acquired an image. So this little window here is always going to show you the most recent snapshot that Octolapse has taken. It's not a live view of your webcam. It's not a stream. It's just going to show you the most recent snapshot that it's taken. And as Octolapse builds up snapshots, it'll start to show you a little preview of what your time lapse is going to look like. And by default, Octolapse captures, I believe, 30 frames for the preview, but you can actually adjust that by clicking here in the main settings, editing the main settings, scrolling down here to the snapshot viewer, and increasing the number of animation frames. I kind of like 30. I think that's pretty good. So if you click in this time-lapse preview, you'll actually trigger the animation. So if you see I click it there, and you can kind of see how Octolapse rewinds time and then plays your snapshot, all your snapshots in a row. And it's not actually, it does download these from the server, but it downloads them one at a time, these images, and then it caches them. So it's not using bandwidth to play the animation. And right here you can see how many snapshots have been captured so far. If there's an error from your webcam or from, let's say you're running a DSLR, there will be a little red link that says snapshot errors. It'll show you how many errors there are. Right here you can collapse the current run configuration if you want to make things a little bit tighter and neater. And at the bottom you'll see the same or a very similar view to what you saw when you first started the print, that snapshot plan preview. Well, this is the live snapshot plan. So it tells you here that it's showing the 18th plan, so the 18th snapshot. Now it moved up to 19. And this is, again, a little illustration of what your extruder is going to be doing, as well as the positions, how far you are completed with the current snapshot. When it gets to 100%, it'll trigger another one. And then, of course, you can animate here to see what it's going to do. And this button actually goes back to the current plan, so that it'll show you the most recent plan. Now normally I would let this continue all the way to the end, since it's a pretty short print. It only takes a few minutes. It says 40 minutes. I think it takes more like 15. But I'm going to go ahead and cancel it so I can show you what happens. This happens if you cancel Octolapse while it's in the middle of taking a snapshot. It doesn't really like that. I'm going to see if I can make that error go away in the future. But you'll also notice this video rendering box that pops up after your print's finished. This means that a video is in the process of rendering. And if you click in here, you get a little process, like how complete it is. It kind of shows you the rendering progress. You can see what print, the G-code file that you used to print, how the print ended. So the status, maybe it shows disconnected or completed or failed here. In this case, I canceled it. It'll show you the size of all the images that it's going to render, the date that the print completed, what camera you used to take the images, because in Octolapse you can have more than one camera enabled. So it'll show them all here, and it'll show you what rendering profile is being used. So as soon as this completes, I'll show you some additional views. Let me just pause it and I'll come back when it's done. Okay, so the rendering just completed. So I'm going to close this. And if you've used Octolapse previously, this is kind of a new feature too. This is the videos and images pop up. If I click here, it'll show you all the time lapses you have completed. You have some options for selecting them. You can delete the items that have been selected. You can download the video by clicking here, or you can delete it by clicking here. So I recommend you download your video, see how it turned out, and let's take a look at it. So here's what ours look like. Not very much, it moves up, but it's clear. My camera probably needs to be pointing more in this direction. So the next time I run a test print to get everything lined up, I'll probably adjust my camera. I may make some tweaks to the camera settings. And then I recommend you kind of rinse and repeat this process, where you're adjusting your camera or your image, or you're playing with the stabilization position, and keep running it in test mode until you're comfortable enough to do a live print. And once everything seems to be set up right, then you can disable test mode here, and you can start a live print. Now I'm not going to actually do that. I don't believe I have any filament loaded in my printer right now, but I can show you one other interesting feature. So I'm going to go ahead just to show you this, and I'm going to enable test mode. I'm going to start a print, can accept it, and you can see my printer's going through the motions. It's possible that you may want to stop Octolapse, but you might not want to stop your print. So maybe you see that Octolapse is causing some quality issues and it's a critical print, so you want to stop it. Well, there's a stop button right here. If you click on that, it'll ask you to confirm, and I hit OK, and it'll basically stop the time lapse. It'll continue printing, but Octolapse won't inject any G-code. It won't stabilize. So it will tell you still that the time lapse is canceled. It'll say the test mode is enabled, and this will all go away as soon as the print completes. So I can take that off right now. And just to walk you through a couple fun things on the interface that are new. If you have multiple cameras enabled, you can switch the time-lapse preview. You can switch which camera snapshots you're viewing by picking your camera in this list. Right now I only have one configured, so there's only one to select. There's also some shortcuts. If you want to open all your printer profiles and, let's say, export your settings, you can open this. There's an export profile button, and now I can share that with a friend, or I can store it for use later. You can download all your settings. This is a good way to back up your Octolapse settings after you have everything perfect. You can download this and then you have a backup. You can import settings, either from a file, like either one of these two I could import, or you can just paste in the text and import those there. Of course, there's a restore defaults button. That'll set everything back to the way Octolapse was when you installed it. There's also this update profiles button. So here you can check for updates. By default, if you go to the main settings, Octolapse is set to check for updates every 30 days. That's a pretty good interval. That gives me some time when I release a new profile so that not everyone's getting it all at the same time, so that we can kind of test them out a little bit. But Octolapse will check for updates anytime you reboot, or if you leave your Pi on all the time, once every 30 days. So I'm going to click that right now. So it says that all my profiles are up to date. If they weren't, it would tell you there's an update, ask if you want to apply them, and then it'll tell you whether or not it had success or it failed. Now also on the tab, there is a link right here. If you click on the version number, you most likely don't see this extra stuff at the right. This is there because I'm running a development version. And this is actually the GitHub commit number. So if I click on this, it's going to take me directly to the last commit that I added to Octolapse. And if you've installed through the plugin manager, it should take you, it should take you to the release that you installed. So if you had this release installed, it would take you to this page, give you some information. There's usually some links in here and some known or unsolved issues and bug fixes or enhancements. So you can read all about the version that you have installed there. And then to the left of that, there's a couple of other nice links. This first one opens up the Octolapse About tab. And here I've got all of my patrons who've supported me on Patreon. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. I've also got a list of contributors or people who deserve some honorable mentions. If you don't know who Gina is, she's the creator of Octoprint, so she deserves a lot of love for this. She's the one that made all this possible, so thanks a lot, Gina. And then everyone else who's either committed new features or helped me with formatting or just supported me through this development. And I also have links to the GitHub repository. We showed you that earlier. You click in there, but this is a link to my GitHub page, so there's a couple other repositories in here. Octolapse, of course. The Arc Welder plugin, which is unreleased, but it's pretty cool, so you might want to check that out. And then there's also a link to my YouTube channel. That's probably where you found this video, so I won't go there. Then a link to PayPal. If you want to drop me some coffee money or some beer money, I'd appreciate it. But Octolapse is open source, so I don't expect any donations. But if you want to tell me thanks, I wouldn't object. And then there's also a link to my Patreon page if you want to become a patron. So you might want to check that out. All right, so we've walked through the Getting Started guide. I think that's everything. So again, I recommend you play around with it, see what works, see what doesn't. Check out some of the other guides, look through the wiki. If you have any problems with anything, you may want to go back to the wiki and look at this troubleshooting link. I plan on adding a lot to this, and I've separated out the troubleshooting into little sections. So if you have installation issues, there's a guide here. Printer setup issues, there's a little section and there's a guide. Camera issues, stabilization problems, problems rendering, print quality, and if all else fails, you can report a new issue. I've got instructions on how to do that, how to generate a log, basically everything you're going to need to do to report a new issue. If you want to submit a feature request, I've also got some information here. There's a lot of different guides. You may want to look through how to configure a DSLR, although I don't recommend that you follow the DSLR guides until you're pretty comfortable using Octolapse. It's not a good thing to do for your first time using Octolapse. In other words, there's some pretty advanced things. But I plan on improving this and updating it, so check back here often. As I discover bugs or new guides or fixes or workarounds, I'm going to definitely put them here. Okay, so thanks for watching. We'll hopefully see y'all soon, and happy Octolapsing.